All right. Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is Jared Thomas, who is an expert in, well, we'll just say flow motion movement. How about that? He's a guy who I've seen do some pretty incredible feats with kettlebell juggling, as well as mace flows and all sorts of other different movements that are very avant-garde in terms of the how they look, but the fitness output that you get from a lot of them may surprise you. And I'm going to have him dive more into it because I have to admit I am far from an expert on these things, which is why I bring the experts on. And Jared most definitely is one. Now, before we get started, I of course want to remind my listeners that if you have not already, you should go get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. Number one, it's free. Everybody likes free things. But number two, it is designed to be done in conjunction with your regular training, not in place of it. So even if you're currently on a program, a very strict program, this is the sort of a thing that's designed to be done with it because it is based around your gait pattern. So stuff like crawling, loaded carries with kettlebells, and other things like that. Stuff that takes like 30 seconds to learn how to do, but has a huge amplifying effect on the rest of the stuff that we do. All you need to do to get it is go to 9minutechallenge.com and follow the instructions there. I'm like a caveman with a computer, so if I can do it, I am pretty sure that you will have no problems either. So 9minutechallenge.com, and that bad boy is yours. Now, without further ado, Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here, brother.
Absolutely. And you were calling all the way from a city that I would have figured would have been in the Eastern time zone, but evidently is not. You were calling from Nashville, Tennessee. But you don't have a Nashville accent. Are you originally from Nashville?
Well, I'm not originally from Nashville, but although I do call it Nashville a lot,
Nashville?
Nashville, yeah. I'm originally from Arkansas, so I have been in the South basically my whole life. I lived in Richmond, Virginia for a couple of years, but they still call that the South. So,
I think it is.
um, so I do too, you know. But I guess I don't have as thick an accent. We'll say that. Usually, I do say y'all with some draw and some other fun situations where the draw comes out. But no, been here for about 9 years in February, which is wild to think because I feel like I just moved here. But
Yeah.
anyhow,
Well, Nashville is kind of I went there for the first time. That's how we met. And I was there for the first time just was it I guess late November 2023 and early December. And it's a cool city. Yeah, I think it's very interesting because anytime I travel through the United States, I'm like aware of just how different everything is in different parts. Like there are other countries where it's pretty much the same top to bottom or wherever you go, but South feels like a very, very different place relative to East Coast, relative to the Midwest, relative to the West Coast. So yeah, it's always a lot of fun to check stuff like that out. And it seems like there are a lot of people moving to Nashville. So whatever they're doing there is certainly attracting uh, a lot of people. And again, I think the more people we have in the central time zone, the better, because it makes it a lot easier for me to set things up because I have to try to convert from central time to whatever else. Everyone's used to Eastern. So yeah, I appreciate that.
2 hours away, but no, still central here.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I'm curious because you have just such a unique approach to training with kettlebell juggling, mace flow, and other things that seem like they make up the majority of your training. Um, how how did you get into training in general? Like, were you always fit as a kid? Were you did you do sports? Like, what is your give us like the official Jared Thomas origin story?
Yeah, well, I kind of gave a condensed version to someone the other day about this, and so I would say I played growing up. I played all the major sports that you could that were available to you in the South. It's not many, mostly football, basketball, baseball, soccer. I even tried cross country at one point, and I was not great at basically any of them. I was not good at any of them. I think that some of that's because my father was my coach in many of those cases, but also because I just didn't dedicate the time as much needed to them. But I found wrestling when I was um, 16. And actually, wrestling was new to the state of Arkansas. And believe it or not, it was like Arkansas was, for some reason, one of the last states to get high school wrestling.
Hmm.
Being that you're in Nebraska, I'm sure you grew up all around wrestling. right?
Yeah, I wish actually that I had done it in high school because I found it's impossible as an adult to find wrestling classes. I fortunately there's a gym that offers it because it's a martial arts gym, and it's the only gym I've ever seen that offers like adult wrestling. But it's such a great skill to have, and I think as a kid it gives you so many skills that you can apply to all sorts of other things. So it's good that you discovered it or that it came to Arkansas when it did.
It changed my life. I think wrestling is truly one of, if not the best, like base sport you could perform for athletics because it just creates an immensely strong and resilient body and mind. You know, when I first started doing it, so here's an interesting thing. Wrestling was new to Arkansas, but oddly enough, the blind school of Arkansas, which and the deaf school, which were together in Little Rock, where I'm from, had wrestling for years, but you know they would compete with other blind schools, and that was it until like all the other high schools adopted it in what was that 2006 2007. So we started wrestling the blind school first, and I remember getting my butt handed to me by like their team captain who had just been wrestling for probably all his life because he probably didn't have anything. I mean, they didn't have a lot of sports. I think literally the blind school, believe it or not, has wrestling and track, and that was it. I didn't even know. I mean, they had to explain to me how they did track, but which is kind of interesting.
I
But
would love
never,
an explanation actually because I'm thinking wrestling makes sense because you can feel your opponent, you know.
Mhm.
Track, on the other hand, I try walking with my eyes closed just to see how far I can get before I start veering, and it's not
Mhm.
far. So I would be very curious how they do that.
I mean, I definitely think that they would do like the 100 meter and and a few of the select ones. But yeah, they worked up to it. I know that there was some special cadences they do for it, but nevertheless, you know, it was a humbling experience to start with, but it was the first thing. I mean, like the sport of wrestling is resilience,
Yeah.
truly. It's also, I believe, the base art form or martial arts style, you might say, for a majority of the champions of the UFC.
Yep.
Um, and so, you know, anyhow, it was like it was absolutely a life-changing sport for me and gave me a whole new perspective on fitness. And so I started that uh, when I was about 16 and just really into it. The summer between my junior and senior year of high school, one of the donors who had really helped to make a big push for wrestling in the state of Arkansas was a guy in commercial insurance and had just developed a business in Little Rock. And he had wrestled from outside of the state somewhere else. And he brought in Pat Smith from who was the very first four-time NCAA champion wrestler from Oklahoma State, moved him to Little Rock. Like, and I think like basically gave him a place to stay or what have you. But he moved him and his wife to Little Rock, and that summer I had the opportunity to train with, you know, after 1 year of wrestling, had the chance to train with the very first four-time NCAA champion in wrestling, and and it was amazing training that put me in a great position for my senior year, where I was fortunate to at the end of the year actually win the state title in Arkansas. So, as I was telling this somebody the other day, it was one of these, like in life, you don't always know that you've got a moment that you're gonna remember forever. But when I did win the state championship and Pat Smith was right there, he's like, "Yeah, good job, dude." I was like, that was one of the coolest things that I know may ever happen to me. So, anyhow, that was the foundation. And when I got to college, after that, I was like, because I had really only just discovered wrestling in the past, you know, a couple of years before that, I was hungry. I wanted more, like more resilient, more difficult training. I wanted to keep getting better. And so, like you mentioned, actually, you know, you said you found a martial arts gym where they do wrestling. That is generally the case of where somebody could find it in adulthood, and they'll likely find it either in the form of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some form of no-gi grappling, submission wrestling, catch wrestling. Um, my friend Jake Shannon runs Scientific Wrestling, and that is an amazing sport. And it's practiced in a lot of places, and we did it a lot in Arkansas. And so I was exposed to that as well as a lot of Muay Thai, a lot of Kali with stick and dagger. We even did some JKD, Jeet Kune Do. We did some Wing Chun. And then, of course, all that led into MMA. And so I had the opportunity to do some MMA fights while I was in college and getting an accounting degree at the same time and working and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And so I was fortunate to have some success there as well. I fought in Branson, Missouri, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Springdale, Arkansas. And after I graduated, I moved to Richmond, Virginia. I worked for a job that took me out there, and that same job brought me here to Nashville. And basically, I just kept up my fitness, and I had an intention of like holding this lightning in a bottle as much as I could because I had a pretty good stamina and cardio, and could still maintain that with a pretty good amount of quickness, I would say, which was one of the areas where I was able to have success in competition. So did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a few years, got to be a blue belt there, taught a kickboxing class that led all the way into the pandemic.
Mm.
And that's where the story takes the turn into flow, as you might imagine.
So where did kettlebells come into play along the line? Because you've been lifting kettlebells for some time, and the stuff that I've seen you doing is quite advanced. So that leads me to believe you've been lifting kettlebells for at least some amount of time. Did you discover that around college era as well, or was this post college?
That's a good question. I would say I know I had held or swung a kettlebell sometime during college, but I would not say I definitely didn't have one. I probably got my first kettlebell like that I owned probably around 2014, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I got I have three actually in the corner of the room there. Yes for all bells that I bought on Amazon, I think. And I think it was like a 16 kg, 35 pound, 20 kg, 44, and a 24 kg, 53-pound bell. So I got those in order over time, but I really used that 35-pound bell to start with, and I used that for a lot. But if I'm being honest with you, what I did mostly is I found some YouTube workouts, and that was my intention at that point. I this is like for me, this is like pre-socials. I like had an Instagram maybe, but I didn't do anything with it. It was like the occasional, hey, I visited this city. I have 110 followers. My friends and family might like it. And then I won't post anything for like 6 months and then post something again. That was generally the case for me. I was more or less interested in just keeping my fitness up.
Mm-hmm.
I was teaching a kickboxing class. And then it was after I discovered the mace that all that changed. And so the YouTube workouts I was doing before was mostly, I found this couple called their brand or their company's called Fitness Blender, Kelly and Daniel. And I did a lot of their workouts, but it didn't really like, hang the moon for me or anything. I liked it. I enjoyed it. For me, it was an easy way to do fitness in my house if I didn't want to go to the gym. And I was the type of person that, believe it or not, that would still get in any kind of a workout, even if I had to make something up at my house. But, there's a level of satisfaction and creativity that evolved once I picked up the mace to where after that, when I picked up the kettlebell again, it was like, wait a sec, this is a different tool now. And then I stopped. I don't know if I would say I stopped limiting myself as much as I really just let the expansion go and let it go to wherever I wanted it to go.
But you probably already had a pretty good base of some of the foundational movements from your wrestling, if I'm not mistaken, because I know a lot of wrestlers do like loads of push-ups, lots of squats, lunges, there's plenty of running, like partner carries over the back and stuff like that. Do you think that laid down a decent foundation for you to have that plus wrestling to have the strength and coordination necessary to succeed with kettlebell flow and mace flow and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the deal. I think like I said, as a wrestler, wrestling as a sport, and then the degree to which somebody keeps that intensity or maintains it through the rest, like if you apply the mentality that you have developed in wrestling to a lot of things in life, you will find success.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough sport. So all those things you're mentioning, yeah, like fireman's carries and double unders, and you're doing, taking, sprawls and shots. And I mean, these are all things that I continue doing that I even implemented in my kickboxing classes that I was teaching leading right up to the pandemic. The stuff that I had done with the kettlebells to begin with was just basic. It was mostly basic kettlebell swings. We did high pulls. I say we, like this is me
The
looking at,
royal we.
yeah, yeah.
Aye.
Yeah, that's right. The capital T on that,
Yeah.
capital T truth. No, basic stuff. I did gorilla rows. I think that's what they call them when you're or bent over rows.
Hmm.
A lot of the isolated movements, basic swings, I guess they call them American swings, where you go all the way up. And yeah, there was definitely some foundational elements there that you would probably find to be, you may say universal. I don't know if you would go that far, but like where it's really common that everybody that's picking up a kettlebell is doing halos. I was doing halos a lot early on.
Hmm.
Um, but even that changed significantly from the time that I started to utilize the mace and then started to really work the overhead swing. So
Hmm.
there are some foundational elements that helped. I would say wrestling and martial arts was the biggest help. That's what I tell people is the foundational element to all my training, because that's where fluid movement comes in. That's where posture comes in.
Hmm.
Um, and as you heard Cliff talk about and say during our certification, that so much of what I do is about efficiency, and he's right. I like develop this insatiable satisfaction, and like both in the mind as well as in the body, towards doing things that were less against the grain, how you say, and more going with the motion of my body and getting an exceptionally higher amount of reps as a
Hmm.
result. So that's probably where I would say the practice of the rubber meeting the road really came into play for me.
Very cool. Very cool. And now I'm curious as well because I've only done a little bit of kettlebell juggling, but it was like very, very rudimentary stuff, like swing it, flip it, catch the handle, and things like that. But you're going side to side, over your head, turning around, grabbing it, things like that. Is there like, are these things you just decided I'm going to try this out, see how this works, or are there like progressions that you use to build up to that sort of a thing?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I mean, definitely, probably a little bit of a combination of both. And let me ask you, when you did your little whatever, however much experimentation you did with it, were you using a cast iron bell or were you using a competition bell or
Yeah,
what?
no, I never used competition bells. I mean, I've trained with them before, but primarily like all my kettlebells are, I guess you'd call them military grade or like just cast iron.
Yeah.
And again, it was mostly just a really basic stuff. Again, like two hand swing, flip, or hand to hand, or whatever, or maybe helicopter and then grab with the other hand, but
Mhm.
never anything that really got me out of the bilateral stance or out of the sagittal plane, just straight forward and backward.
Yeah, I mean, and believe it or not, that makes a huge difference. But I would say, I mean, so I had a cast iron to start. Those same Yes for All bells that I had going back to 2014 or 15, that very first one that I got, that was 16 kg, 35 pounds. That was when I basically, what had happened is I never tried any juggling or anything like that prior to me having picked up the mace. The mace was the tool that really began expanding my mind in terms of what was possible. And once I sort of took off that, I don't know if you call it restriction or what have you, I basically allowed for unlimited creative expansion.
Hmm.
So after having used the mace for several months into 2020, it was towards the end of the year that I really started to pick up the kettlebell again and started going, wait, what can I do with this? And at that same time, actually, I would say even before the pandemic, the guy that ran my kickboxing class before I took it over, he showed me a guy actually in Nashville. Um, his name is Gavin, but on the Instas, on the socials, he goes by Twisted Steel Cheat Meal. And Gavin is an awesome kettlebell juggler. He's been doing it for several years. And when I first saw it, I was like, there's no way. Like I didn't even think, like I was like, that's awesome. I think I did a couple of things with the kettlebell. I was like, how does he flipping it? And of course, I didn't have a competition bell with me at the time to really be able to lean into it. But at the same time, it just wasn't where I was at that point. But I revisited him, and of course, over this, I say, journey for me that really started in 2020, I began to follow and become friends with others in the community, like Jared Cardona and other folks that were tossing and juggling with the kettlebell. And so that's when I started doing it with my cast iron first. And it wasn't long before I realized, like, okay, there's probably something to the reason why it is that these guys that are juggling it and that are also so skilled are using the competition bells, and it's a big difference. The I would almost like say that when you flip a cast iron bell, it makes like a womp 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 sound. It doesn't make a
Mhm.
sound, but if I was to describe, I was to like be a movie sound guy, I'd be like, that's the sound that it makes, right?
Yeah.
But like, a competition bell, especially like I would argue Eleiko, um, it spins very smoothly. It's like
Mhm.
it's literally like a ball. Like if you can imagine like the planets and space and stuff, it almost feels like a ball that's just spinning perfectly, and then the handle just comes right into your hand. So,
Mhm.
so I would say I started. I'm not like a lot of people. I did not. I definitely went for a lot of difficult things in the beginning,
Mhm.
but I also recognize the value, especially as a martial artist, of learning the root form of something and practicing over and over and over and over again. So once I started to get the competition kettlebells, especially I would say like a 12 kg was like my first competition kettlebell from Kettlebell Kings. That's when I was able to get the simple. The simple is called the simple because it's the most basic kettlebell juggle. It's literally where the bell comes up to the midline level. And once it hits the float position, the suspension, you're going to push the handle up. Your other hand, or actually, I'm sorry, that's the reverse. When you push it down, you're carrying momentum and you push the handle down, your free hand will be on top. So the handle spins right into it. And that's where you'll catch it and grab it. Um, and that's also where there's a tremendous amount of benefit from it. So I would say I definitely got to the point where I was working all of the basics really simply, but when I first looked at it, especially with the cast iron, I just was looking at expansion of any kind at that point.
Mhm. And now, have you worked with other people who've been trying to learn these skills? Because again, these seem like I think you're uniquely suited to it in the sense that you had a good start with wrestling and martial arts, because those things definitely give you a huge advantage with coordination and control and like body awareness. And do you find that they're working with other people who've ever tried to learn it, that without that base, they can still learn it, but maybe it takes longer, maybe you've got some shortcuts that help them to pick it up more quickly. Like, what's your experience been?
Yeah, so I think my experience will be different. A part of my journey now, or I should say my intention now at this point is really to make content that will help break things down for people. And I'm not the only one. Now there are a number of individuals who in the juggling world specifically are creating content that is really breaking it down step by step for people. Um, and there's a lot of really amazing jugglers out there. I didn't have a lot of people around me, and in fact, one thing that's interesting to say, I mentioned Gavin earlier. Um, I've met Gavin a number of times in person. He lives here in Nashville. He's probably the only other person in Nashville. I'm trying to think about even like the surrounding area, I guess a little bit, that has been doing juggling for any length of time, and in a lot of ways is similar to me. And we just haven't, for whatever reason, made the opportunity to be able to get together and actually do some juggling. But I would say that while it's not nearly as much in terms of the breadth of and the variety of content that you will find in kettlebell juggling as you will with hard style and even sports style and maybe just the more mainstream versions of kettlebell movement. It's growing, and and a lot of people still like when you say kettlebell juggling, they're like, wait, did you say kettlebell juggling? Like, they other people don't even believe it until they see it. And so and mostly we just call it juggling because that just seems like the most appropriate way to call it, because the bell's spinning and flipping and does some pretty wild stuff once you
Mhm.
develop the spatial awareness for knowing where it's going and tracking it in your mind and so forth. And so um, there's some stuff on my page where it shows some basic rudimentary ways to go about a couple drills, but I'm going to be adding a lot more over the course of next year. So much of my channel, just as another kind of side to say, at least up to this point, has been about exploration, whether
Mhm.
it's with the mace, whether it's with the ropes, the kettlebell. So that's really been a lot of what I've done up to this point, but 2024 is going to be the year of education for sure.
It's great. That's very good. What are some benefits in addition to the obvious? It looks cool and it feels awesome. What are some of like the fitness benefits that might get somebody who's primarily, let's say, interested in hard style, saying, okay, you know what, maybe I could see adopting this or adopting this new style to add on to what I'm currently doing? Like, what are some of the maybe the benefits most people would not expect from kettlebell juggling specifically?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I'm gonna pull it back to a lot of what Cliff was talking about in our certification. I mean, I think, so much of one of the reasons why I connected with Cliff early on when I did discover him just a few months before our certification was his intention on making kettlebells athletic and using the tool as it is to develop put yourself in positions that create athletic range of motion and power, and that can translate well to a variety of other things in life. And I would say juggling really goes hand in hand with that. And in a lot of ways, it goes to the furthest extension of that. So one of the obvious ones is that obviously juggling is different than everybody else, or I say than every other way that you could use a kettlebell, is that you're literally letting go of the bell.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that you can do, all right, if you're, for any of your listeners or what have you, they could literally go and do this with their cast iron right now. And it's not even really juggling, but it'll kind of give them a taste, which is when you perform your swing and you hit that point of suspension, allowing the bell, basically seeing how long you can wait before you grab it again. So when you're switching hands at the top, if you're doing single hand swings, for example, and you're just doing the most basic version of it, you're switching at the top, allowing your eyes to track that handle. So as it goes up, you can basically see how long you can wait until you can grab it again and keep the momentum going until the next swing. And what that is it's just working your hand-eye coordination.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first part, right? And so as that expands, it's hand-eye coordination, and it's also presence of mind, because as you begin going overhead, or as you begin increasing, let's say, the number of spins that you have, the spatial awareness and the attention to detail of the present moment, it brings you in. So in some ways, you could even say that it's meditative. The movements are naturally ones that are very, I use the word satisfying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel good. It's one of these things that reminds me of when I was a kid and I would get tired from playing with my friends and not even realize I was out of breath, and like, I'm like sweating bullets, and like, it's like you come in the house and your mom's like, oh gosh, what are you doing? It's like, you're like, you don't even realize you're just like having so much fun, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, but you're worn out, but at the same time, you're just trying to go for the next thing. So there's a lot of innate satisfaction that comes from it that helps with your posture and your core. So every time the bell comes up, you have to have a really good, solid posture. And so it's immediately going to bring attention to your to how tall you're standing, especially once you catch the bell. So releasing the bell opens your spatial awareness, brings you to the present. You're instantly forced to. It's like a lizard brain, mammalian brain, like, I can't think about anything else that's going on in my life. This steel item is moving around me and I need to pay attention to it. So it becomes sort of meditative in that aspect, as well as developing your hand-eye coordination. And then once you catch the bell, all right, perhaps most critical of all, is that the goal is to catch it in such a way that you can continue the motion into some form of transition, whether it's right back on the sagittal plane, whether you catch it, you do a swing, you come into a clean, go laterally, and a number of ways that you'll transition the bell. But the key is that you'll be most aware of your posture, because what a lot of people will do, especially, like, I have a video I just posted on this. I taught somebody the basic kettlebell juggle while at the Parthenon here in Nashville. And you're going to notice, if you go to this video, I posted it like last week, the guy, as he's starting out with the juggle, is reaching to grab the bell. So when he extends beyond his center of gravity, he has a harder time maintaining his balance as it goes down. So quickly you learn, I need to flip it such that it's coming into me,
Mm-hmm.
closer to my center of gravity, so I don't overextend and risk my posture or my back or just my structural integrity of the way that I'm positioned and standing. So all of these things come at you quick. And so I would say, just off the cuff, those are instantly the things that will be challenged and then will improve significantly with kettlebell juggling.
That was very cool. One thing that comes to mind too, I remember a number of years ago, probably the first person that I ever saw doing loads and loads of kettlebell juggling was a guy named Gus Peterson. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him. He had a system. I think he had some DVDs too. I don't know. I'm sure they're still around. Point being, he um he had a stroke, and I mean, evidently it was a bad one. He wrote an article about this, and he, like, to the surprise of all of the doctors and nurses, he was able to walk out of the hospital like a week later or whatever, when most people would be wheeled out and they would need intense physical therapy. And one of the things that he said was that the development of all this complex movement not only helped his body and his fitness, but it also helped his brain. And so he had stronger connections between the two hemispheres. I read this article over 10 years ago, so I'm heavily paraphrasing it, but this is one thing that I think most strength training lacks, is this element of complexity, where there are more steps and more layers to the skill that you have to learn, where you may not be going as heavy, you may not be going as hard, you may not be going as fast, but you're getting a better development perhaps in mobility and athleticism, and then also in your brain function and health. And this is a sort of a thing that I think scares a lot of people, because if you've ever met somebody who's had a stroke, or you've had a loved one who's had a stroke, or any other sort of um, a debilitating brain related issue, we can't say that this would prevent it, but at a minimum, because it's very difficult to say you can prevent injuries or pain or whatever, but if this could be the sort of a thing that would be a hedge against some of these problems that people face as they get older, I think that would be a huge selling point.
I mean, I think you're totally right. In fact, the first thing that came to mind, even as you were saying that, and I've thought about this a lot myself. I've read similar things with regards to, say, learning multiple languages in terms
Absolutely.
of fighting dementia and Alzheimer's. And I would argue that you're absolutely right. The complexity of it creates a brain body connection, requires your mind to have to think in certain patterns that I think is very important. And I think neurologically it's important. So every time, so bringing it back to another benefit, not only is it that hand-eye coordination, but the CNS firing. Every time that bell hits your hand, you're developing a sense of nature of being able to grab it and how that response happens. So you're training your nervous system to respond a certain way when you come into contact with that hard energy. And I think that the value of that is one that I think I would sell short in my ability to be able to describe the benefits of it. I think it's a lot, tremendous benefit.
Yeah, people forget that fitness and exercise and physical abilities in general, they don't start and stop with just sets and reps. I think those are very important, obviously, but ideally you want it to be something that gets you better prepared to face the world around us. It's easy now, especially, to forget just how hard life was for, I don't know, basically all of history until about the past few decades, and like really, really indescribably hard. And if you were not physically strong, I mean, that's where the saying goes, only the strong survive. Um, if you were not physically strong, you were not capable, you were not hardy, and you were not capable of overcoming a great many issues, you were done for. And even if you were, it would oftentimes take a lot out of you. But you needed to make but you need to have some sort of a base that allows you to face what you're likely to face in the real world. We're very fortunate that now it isn't, something like a coal mine collapsing or some other horrendous way to end this mortal coil. But we still have issues with health. Now, a lot of the diseases that we have more to do with not moving enough, as opposed to over moving, or whatever the case may be. And so I think that anything that is going to help you to hedge off some of the diseases of civilization, let's say, that
Mm.
we've acquired or that have increased over the last few decades, is something that's going to give you a huge boost over just show up, do some sets and reps, then sit for the next 12 hours.
Yeah, I think a lot about how, like you're saying, life will throw an immense amount of challenges at you, and there's there's a million things that different ways that pressures can be exerted on your body in a number of different ways. And all of those things are, whether they're intentionally trying to or not, will, if you're not careful, pull you off your center of gravity and onto the ground in ways that you probably don't, or onto some other thing if it's a natural force of disaster. Tennessee's had all kinds of tornadoes here lately, which is really strange, but that seems to be something that's happening more often. But regardless, yeah, I would argue you're exactly right. Being prepared for life and the randomization of it is also something that complexity will add into in terms of preparing somebody for as life goes on.
Definitely. Now, one last question that I want to ask, because I know almost nothing about it, yet a lot of my followers and fans have asked me about it, and I'm like, I don't have an answer. I've only ever played with it a little bit, is the steel mace, because I know you do a lot with that. I just saw the ASMR video, steel mace ASMR video that you put out the other day. So, tell us a little bit about mace training in general, some of the benefits, and how it flows well together with what you do with the kettlebell.
Yeah, I think it works really well with kettlebells. In general, I personally see a lot of patterns between the variety of implements, the increasing variety of implements of tools that one could pick up and utilize for, for any form of train for several different forms of training. I tend to specialize, or rather focus on four primary tools, I would say, which are maces, clubs, kettlebells, and also rope. And all of these tools, I'm working against my tall posture, and I'm essentially observing and learning the myriad of ways in which I can efficiently move them around my body, and also me move around them as well through space. And so the similarities are tremendous. It's just just different tweaking in the tool, for example. So I had a post recently where I talked about shield casts, which for many, I think, in the mace community are also considered 360s, and they're you could say that they're the same thing. They're very, very, very similar. But essentially, the primary movement with a mace is a 360. It's a movement whereby you're considered in what's called order position, where you're holding the base of the tool, the tail, as you might say, while the globe is way up high. You're performing a swing that goes over your shoulder on the frontal plane, directly to your left or your right, goes behind your head to where then you're in a full extension and you have surrendered to the depth of the swing before it comes around right back to that order position back up top. So going back in line with what we talked about earlier, that's going to develop your proprioception and your spatial awareness, giving you a better map of the world around you. It's going to help you with your meditative sense of needing to relax and all the other, so much of what people are looking for in fitness anyways. It's going to really help them to get in the middle of that and to relax. But really, it builds strength. I call it fascia fitness, because when you perform a swing, it's not just the shoulder, it's the hip, it's the leg, it's the foot. You are literally having a force when it drops and it hits the back part of the swing. It's pulling you to the ground, pushing you down. And if your posture is not tall and strong in a natural way, you will bend and buckle in weird ways to get that thing around. So you can, in the beginning, it's usually because people are afraid of hurting themselves. And it makes sense. Like you're adjusting to this new tool. But over time, it's going to make you stronger. It's going to connect your posture all along the posterior chain. So every swing you do, and instantly, as you see that, this is a baseball move. This is, it could be just a regular sports move, or it could also be, like you said, whether it's a caveman with an email, it could be a caveman with a club who's got to swing to attack. In fact, one of the reasons why I think clubs and maces are so cool is because they highlight what I believe to be a feature, not a bug, but a feature of humanity, which is the weighted loaded shoulder swing, which ultimately can get stronger and stronger, and it builds, I would say, basically all the major musculature and also the fine-tuned motor muscles of your shoulders especially, but again, also of your posture in general. So you learn that kind of a swing, I think, is uh, it was perhaps almost lost, but I think it's beginning to be picked up again in terms of the functionality of it as humans and the satisfaction that comes with it, as well as, gosh, I mean, the variety of ways that it starts to connect parts of your body allows you to do everything else. And so, yeah, going back to that kettlebell, the idea of making something athletic, I would argue that the way that it connects your entire posterior chain, makes your posture stronger, starts to begin a dialogue between your major muscle groups and all of your fine-tuned motor muscles. There's hundreds of muscles and muscle groups in the body, and I just think that these types of movements begin to help connect all of these things in ways that you just don't generally get out of movements that are especially limited to one plane of motion. And so these tools quickly, because of their nature, will help you to add skills and complexity the more that you use them. Because it's funny, it's like the more rudimentary the tool, the vast and greater amount of skill that can be applied to it. Whereas the more complex it is, if it's a leg press, all it does is a leg press for the most part. I mean, you could maybe find some other ways to use a leg press, but it's a machine. Whereas a kettlebell is like, it's this tool, and it's shaped a certain way. And I look at it like, what is the different ways that I can manipulate it and expand around my body, my mind? And so anyhow, it's a deep, deep, deep rabbit hole, one that we're only getting the cusp of here as we
Absolutely.
go through.
We're going to call you the White Rabbit, and I'm going to tell people to follow you. Where can people follow you on social media so that they can keep an eye on the stuff that you're doing, maybe give it a shot themselves?
Yes, follow me down the rabbit hole. Yeah. It's just my name. Nothing special there. Just my name, Jared Michael Thomas. Jared Michael Thomas. That's on Instagram. You should be able to find me on Facebook too. I think it's just Jared.Thomas. I feel like there's like a 58 in there. I'm not the first Jared Thomas for sure.
The
Um,
58th, evidently.
yeah, I guess, which is weird because I've had Facebook since 2005. I had to be invited to Facebook back in high school. So anyhow,
Crazy.
you'd think I should be an OG, but anyhow, and then I'm also on X or Twitter. I've stirred up a couple hornets nests here recently, I think, on there, but I
That's
think
what
that's,
everybody does. By the way, that's the only thing Twitter is good for is angering people.
yeah,
I've
it's
never seen
fun.
it used for anything else.
Yeah. So I think on there I'm at Music City Flow. So
Nice. Very nice. Amazing. There was only one Music City Flow, but there are like 58 Jared Thomases.
yeah, right. Yeah. And I couldn't do Universal Flow either. So anyhow, I'll resort to Music City. That's okay.
Music City's good. It has a cooler sound to it. And it kind of lets people know where you are too, which is also very good.
Most important. So
Very nice. Well, folks, I highly recommend that you check him out. He's got some really cool stuff. The stuff that he can do with the kettlebell and a mace is amazing. And you want to know something? It's amazing. Actually, that's what you should use that. You have my permission. I only have to attribute it to me 3 times. First time, second time, actually third time it's yours. So twice.
believe it or not, you're actually not the first, but
Oh,
I
I
still
believe it. I do
I
believe it.
appreciate it every time.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, check him out. Amazing stuff. Jared, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you,
And
Alex.
folks, as always, have fun and happy training.